Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about 12 minutes with Jay Bonci, the Air Force and Space Force Chief Technology Officer. So stay tuned. We'll get started soon, and get ready with your questions in the comment section below. Also, if you want to share that you're here and your company name, post it into the comments so we can highlight you as well. Thanks for joining. Stay tuned. We'll get started soon. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started about 10 minutes with Jay Bonci, the Chief Technology Officer of the Air Force and Space Force. So stay tuned. Start asking your question into the comment section below. We have a lot of people already asking questions. Also, if you want to share you here, put it into the comment section with your name and the company you're with, and we'll be able to highlight you on the screen as well. Stay tuned. We'll get started in about 10 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about 6-7 minutes with Jay Bonci, the Air Force and Space Force CTO. So get started, get ready for your questions in the comment section below. Start with a Q if you have a question. Also, if you want to share who you're with and what you do, you can put that into the comment section below, and we'll be able to highlight you on the screen as well. Thanks so much. Stay tuned about 5 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about a couple of minutes now. So if you have questions for Jay, please start asking into the comment section below. We have a lot of questions already from LinkedIn, so we'll be starting soon. Also, if you want to share you here and just post your name and your company, we'll be able to highlight you on the screen as well. So get ready. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. Welcome to this new episode of In the Nick of Time. Today with Jay Bonci, the Air Force and Space Force Chief Technology Officer. Very excited to have Jay to tell us a little bit about his role, what he's going to be focusing on, and how he's going to help us and help the warfighter be more lethal and efficient at their jobs to defend our kids and your kids so we can all be safer, particularly nowadays with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine and the tremendous number of hacks we see across the world right now. Targets all over the place with Samsung a couple of days ago, and last week NVIDIA also breached as well. Wanted to remind everybody to also register to the In the Nick of Time show by going to ama.preventbreach.com/register. As you've seen, I was banned from LinkedIn yesterday for about 18 hours for pretty much no valid reason, in my opinion, but that's a different debate. And, that tells us that we need to have, more options. And so clearly the vision is to also push this show on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter as well. And so you can also watch the show on YouTube right now. And we put the link into the comment section below. But please register to the AMA so I can email you and let you know if something happens on LinkedIn that you can join the show elsewhere. As this happened yesterday, we almost thought we had to cancel the show today because of what happened yesterday. So please register. I have about 37,000 followers on LinkedIn, but only 5,000 register on the show. So we need to do better than that. So I need your help spread that word. Also, I guess you could also follow the LinkedIn page In the Nick of Time on LinkedIn. But more importantly, if you can follow my page on youtube.com, that's where we're going to be also streaming. And all the videos will be live and recorded on YouTube, so you can watch them later as well. So you'll see there's all the videos from the previous shows on the YouTube channel as well. So check it out. If you missed the episode with Lauren, the Air Force CIO last week, I think it makes a lot of sense for you guys to be able to check that out. Also, just so you know, there's always a little bit of a delay between when I talk and when you can hear it. Usually LinkedIn is about 20 seconds behind from YouTube. So with YouTube, you'll be more live than with LinkedIn. So something to think about. So again, I'm gonna show up the link if you missed it, so you can check out the link. If you want to also share who is who is here and your name and your title, we can highlight it on the screen as well. And John is the Space Force CTO. Lisa Costa is a CTIO, which is a complete different role. So Lisa is the CTIO of the Space Force, but as a DAF, which is a department of the Air Force, it's both the Air Force and Space Force, just like Lauren and myself, we were both Air Force and Space Force. So just so you know, that's a DAF role. When we have DAF with DAF, that means Air Force and Space Force. If you're just Air Force, you'll be AF CIO or AF CTO. And Lisa is the CTIO, Chief Technology Information Officer for the Space Force. And we should have Lisa on the show as well. All right. So again, if you want to showcase and put on the chat your questions, start with a Q. We already have so many questions from LinkedIn and YouTube as well. So do that. And make sure you also put your name so we can highlight you on the screen as well. Now, a couple of things I wanted to share. If you missed it, I think it's very important, and it's going to be a great discussion with Jay today. Not just how beautiful I look like on TV, that's obvious, but more importantly, the Samsung and NVIDIA hack. I don't know if you missed it, but in this case, Samsung Galaxy source code was stolen by the same, allegedly the same hackers from the NVIDIA hack. That's pretty scary because you can see that the source code is becoming the crown jewels, and they're targeting specifically the kind of DevSecOps environments. So as I said many times in the last 3 years, your DevSecOps stack is now becoming the primary target of hackers to effectively be able to infiltrate and sustain their malicious activity within your systems. So obviously we will be expecting tremendous level of 0 days targeting both the Samsung Galaxy devices and the NVIDIA chips as well. Now that these hackers got access to the source code, it's going to be much easier for them to effectively find malicious or find exploits and use them in real life. So this is pretty scary. Again, this is why you need to invest in your security, not just on your production environments, but also inside of your development environments as well. So please keep that in mind. If you missed it, yesterday on Fox News, I was able to share a little bit of thoughts on the cyber war and what's going on right now between anonymous Russia and the rest of the world, and of course against Ukraine. So you can check that out on those links. Wanted to also bring up our dear guest. So we have a special guest today. Awesome, very technical expert. Usually you find a lot of government expert not to be very deep on the technical side, but in this case, Jay is awesome. So I'm going to bring it up on the screen with me. Welcome, Jay. How are you doing today?
I am doing well, thanks, Nick. Congratulations on making it out of LinkedIn jail. I know it was a tough day yesterday, but you've persevered.
Yeah. You know, if you see why I got banned, honestly, people call me a traitor, and I reply calling them idiots. And apparently, you're allowed to call someone a traitor, but calling them back idiots is a bannable offense. So this is you can't make that up. You know.
We have no comment on LinkedIn policy.
Of course, that has nothing to do with the fact that the same post was on Fox News and sharing stuff like that. So, So Jay, wanted to introduce you for people that don't know you. You are the Air Force and Space Force Chief Technology Officer. You report to the CIO's office, to Lauren, who was our guest last week. You're driving the adoption and resilience and strategic technical vision of the enterprise IT. And that's something that maybe the previous CTOs didn't really focus on. And I think it's pretty refreshing to have someone like you with a very deep technical background not only try to look at what's being done across the enterprise, but also try to make it kind of a cohesive implementation. So we'll talk about that in the questions today. And prior to your role, of course, you were the senior director of public sector engineering at ICAM, where you led a team of 60 engineering operations and consulting professionals, and you designed the entire ICAM public sector portfolio, including, of course, bringing the DCGS, Global Content Delivery Service, DCGS.
GCDS. Yeah.
Yeah, too many acronyms,
That's right.
I always confuse them. And that's used, massively across the department. And you stayed there for 14 years. I don't know how you last so long in a single company. You're very good. I can't do that. And of course, before that, you were involved. Most people maybe don't know that, but you were involved in the open source community before you went to the dark side, like I did. With the VA Linux, and you are a contributor to Debian, the distro.
Yep, still have my signing keys, so I can upload packages whenever. So I have root on all of your machines, technically.
This is pretty good.
Yeah,
I may need to use them one day.
I don't know. Well, I don't know about that.
I have my PHP once. I can trade.
There you go. I also put in a patch to PHP back in the day.
There we go.
Yeah.
So and you're an Eagle Scout. That we're going to need to learn more about the Eagle Scout stuff. But I also wanted to point out that people that don't follow you already on LinkedIn should do that on that Jay Bonci LinkedIn link right here.
All right. Thank you.
All right. So for people, again, that have questions, wanted to remind them, put it into the comment section, but start with a Q because we have so many questions and comments. We don't know sometimes, who is asking what. So don't forget to put your name. Sometimes your name is not going to appear. I'm going to show you what that looks like when you don't do that, so you can see what we see right here. As you see, I have no clue who made the smiley face. So always good to mention your name after that, so we know when you're hiding your profile, particularly on LinkedIn, there's a feature that hides your picture and your name. So. All right, so don't forget to also show, put your name and company so we can highlight you on the screen. We have people coming from all over today, Australia, multiple countries outside of the US, so it's pretty cool. All right, so Jay, tell us a little bit about, and I'm going to bring the next beautiful slide. We talk about your journey a little bit, but we want to hear from you. I mean, particularly the Eagle Scout, I need to know.
Yeah. So, I bring, one of the things that I like to think I bring to this role is an extensive knowledge of knots and how to lash together sticks. So if we need some real pioneering infrastructure as on top of our digital infrastructure, that is I'm the guy. No, but I spent I come from the commercial space. I had worked with the Air Force and the Army for kind of under the DISA umbrella for really over a decade, as well as working on some commercial elements on the kind of custom engineering side of Akamai's business, and decided 14 years was time to get restless and time to take on other challenges, and I had known Lauren from my work at the Air Force, and I had known I have a lot of people I'd consider dear friends there, and decided that this is kind of the right time to kind of take up the mantle of the mission. The CTO job and the series of responsibilities are something that I really have the opportunity to kind of make my own. There aren't a lot of statutory responsibilities, I think, associated with the job, and so really get to focus on what we think is going to make the biggest impact. And to that end, my predecessor was really focused on the innovation kind of science and technology piece of this, which is incredibly important. Topics like quantum resilience, topics like 5G when it was in its infancy, topics like some of the more nascent identity pieces. None of those were incorrect and were good to kind of drive in the Air Force. But now as we're kind of moving into this world where you will mess services up if you silo them. We need to have an integrated architecture and integrated view on things. And we also need to develop kind of the service structures that are really tightly coupled with the technology. And so they need to be very technically opinionated. They need to be very dialed in. And so we're here, I'm here kind of in this seat trying to drive that cohesion. So when we look at like major initiatives, AI readiness, we're looking at really the push to the cloud. We're looking at things like zero trust as an architectural imperative. It requires so many underlying pieces to get right that you can't just have identity guys do one thing and network guys do another thing, and have your application people do a third thing.
Years.
Well, yeah, and and you're not going to get great outcomes. And so, so the world is increasingly cross-functional. We need to have technical leadership to guide cross-functional efforts and to make sure that there aren't seams in between them, as well as the incredibly talented, dedicated engineering and service members that are here to make this reality. So it is it's sort of an exciting challenge. We have a lot to do, and I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, and so I remember being shocked when I started to assess some of the enterprise readiness and seeing even within the same PO shop, a lot of redundant work. And funny enough, teams complaining that their enterprise service that they were building was not being used by others, but yet those same people were not using the other enterprise services created within the same PO shop. So a lot of redundant work. You talked about identity management. You talked about even cloud basic capabilities. When you start to assess the kind of the redundant work, what was the most mind-boggling finding you had during the first few months?
I think there are a few elements that we need to kind of make sure that we have a consistent vision on. A lot of duplication, I would say, is driven by org and funding lines. And so, we have a base infrastructure program, which is powered by one color of money, and then we have another base infrastructure program that's driven by another color of money. And the way in which that gets prioritized and that gets chosen tends to dictate which color of money gets used and where it ends up in the priority queue. And so those are the types of things that people broadly know they're duplicative, but it requires one of the most precious commodities in the Air Force, or really any public sector organization, is going to be senior leader attention. And it takes, because the organizations are set up in a certain way, right, where you have a cloud shop that is perhaps delivering certain types of enterprise capabilities, like let's say ICAM, right? There's no suitable enterprise one, so they're going to deliver an ICAM solution. And platform one felt like, we need to have something that fits into our DevSecOps tool chain, so we're going to deliver another one. Because those orgs are separate, and there isn't really strong leadership at the outset to glue them together, right? Whenever something comes up, then they tend to kind of instantly splinter. And so we see a lot of those types of examples. People know that it's happening, but oftentimes there isn't sort of money or attention to get after it, or prioritization to say, hey, we have the ability to take the money from this thing and apply it to this thing. And so, there are lots of programs that are doing things that are 80% similar. And the difficulty comes in how you resolve the remaining 20%, or how do you shuffle together a core service for that, right? So like there are plenty of good examples where we'll take, for instance, weapon system needs to provide or buy private transport for itself, right? That transport could be provided by the enterprise, but there is some key characteristic about what the enterprise isn't providing that causes them to make a perfectly rational decision with their money to go and do it. And the way there are lots of ways to solve that, right? The first of which is you need to make the Air Force a little bit smaller, right? When you're trying to coordinate among 700,000 people, it's very difficult. And also culturally, area of responsibility owners tend to think like, okay, anything outside of my program purview is risk, right? And I have to be able to control that risk. And the way that we control for that in an enterprise setting is with good service models, right? When you have things that are API driven, when you have things that are provable, when you have things that are that you can see and you can understand, and you have a shared responsibilities model as to how you consume it. Those types of things are able to be consumed by other people. And so increasingly the enterprise needs to be able to prove its credibility to those stakeholders, so that we can start to do things like get better buying power. We can start to get things about we can start to get a sense of true enterprise services and scale.
Yeah, and I was very shocked also that even if you look at the portfolio of C3INN of Gunning Schmidt, who is an awesome dude, they didn't have someone to really look at the engineering of all these different teams and make sure that there's a cohesive implementation A to Z of all these services that depend on each other. And there was really no kind of chief engineer of the entire portfolio really getting down in the tech weed to see how is identity management is going to work with Zero Trust, going to work with cloud, going to work with Platform One, and all these different things. And often you would find work done in a vacuum by each team, even within the same PEO, let alone across the DAF, right? So it was even at a PEO layer, and the same teams. That was always almost funny to me. The same team that were complaining that people were not using their services as the enterprise service, yet we're also now using the other services of the same PEO for other enterprise service, right? So it's like, well, you're not leading by example, right?
Yeah, I think there's a realization that that went on, and that we need to be more technically opinionated, and so there are some reorganization efforts underway to kind of help that and to better align around those services so that that happens. It is Conway's Law. So one of the commenters, so we talk about Conway's Law a lot. In the Conway's Law is the general observation, it's been true since like the 60s or something like that, that technical structures tend to mirror the people structures that create them. And so if you have two groups and they're building different things and they don't talk to each other, then their systems don't talk to each other. And then if they have similar needs, they tend to duplicate it. And it's not malicious. It's not incompetent. It's just that leaders have this massive purview, and it's difficult to be able to drive into the weeds, to be able to tie together two outcomes at kind of a sub-program level, or to be able to re-chop a series of offerings to get to a granular level. So you'd say, okay, actually, hey, you over in the base services division, you should use this component from the cloud division because this is duplication, right? And to kind of and to structure that. And so it is very challenging. It is something that we have clearer eyes on now. Over the last year, and I'm happy to report that I think we're making good progress there. We're also sweeping together similar functions. I think one of the other core things that's like actually very specific to the Air Force is that it's very difficult to innovate in the center. And so because of the way that we fund the center, and the center being sort of the enterprise dollar set, what we're going to see from here really into perpetuity is we're going to see innovation out at the MAGCOM and wing level. And what we need to do is we need to be able to publish the information that they need, and then to figure out what their path is to take something that's great and promote it into the enterprise. We're doing that right now with Integrated Warfighter Network out in PACAF. And so we're developing a kind of new flexible survivable communications packages that are developed by the Chief Architect's Office, that are being developed specifically for PACAF needs. And then we're bringing that back to the enterprise and figuring out, this is how this wires into ICAS, this is how this wires into TDCs, and to be able to take those project elements and to say, oh, okay, the IWN kit are the following kind of 5 big R requirements, and that these requirements map to these other elements. And we're doing the kind of white glove person to person, not a technology problem, a person to person integration to get that lined up. And so that's going to have to be the pattern more and more. I don't know how we scale that. This is one of kind of the core challenges of this job, is to figure out really, how much of this white glove integration work you can do. But it's mostly under its own power now, when we're sort of just supporting it. So, but more and more as we continue to look through these efforts. And there are actually a lot of internal efforts. There are a lot of internal efforts to the Air Force to identify these kind of key areas of overlap and to be able to push it forward. So we're starting to actually publish internal roadmaps. This is actually a key part of it. And the good part about publishing internal roadmaps is that people will ask well-intentioned questions, and we actually discover new functions about the Air Force. So people say, we'll say like, hey, okay, this is the ICAM roadmap. This is what we're doing. People say, oh, what about this ICAM program over here? They're like, excellent, right? And then you can kind of grab them and we'll integrate them with the Air Force into the main line. Or you'll say, this is the hybrid, or like, for instance, we were talking about hybrid cloud, and the sustainment center guys are like, oh, we're thinking about standing up a hybrid cloud. We're like, great, right? And now we can give the sustainment center the parameters around which we'd be like, hey, these are the things that the enterprise needs to learn about hybrid cloud, right? Are we going to go with a hyper-converged cluster solution? Are we going to go with a white box solution in platform one? Are we going to go with a vendor-specific solution for your needs and your control software? These are the parameters on which we're thinking about making those decisions. You can kind of small ball dollar experiment with your mission sets. And then we can say, okay, great. We can then take that learning, which happened far, far, far away from the Pentagon, and then bring it back into the core and then kind of transmit it out to everybody else. And that's been a good and well-received message up and down the leadership levels.
Yeah, you mentioned so many important points here. I wanted to double tap a little bit, right? You talked about the silos and finding duplicative work and trying to bring it back into the enterprise. You mentioned some reorganization to realign maybe the fact that, for example, Cloud One is not sitting into the same senior material leader as Platform One was, to me, pretty much nonsense. And then you see also teams like SRN having their own platform from scratch, and others building their own platform for DevSecOps. Now, of course, everybody's claiming they're going to partner and play kumbaya and all work together magically, and it's going to be beautiful and nice. But I've yet to see it. In the meantime, we see Kesselrun spend about 60 million a year on the platform of DevSecOps versus Platform One not even being funded for the money they've been asking as the enterprise service. How do we solve that? At some point, do you think someone needs to say, hey, this is Conway law and we need to merge teams? And they, my recommendation to the secretary before I left was to say, hey, we're gonna take the Kesselrun platform, not the rest of the team, but the platform team, merge it into Platform One and merge the funding of that and augment the team and get all these 100 billets that we are dying for at Platform One into Platform One, so we can sustain the enterprise service and build the best of breed product with the best talent we have, instead of dividing the into teams and silos and be less efficient. What is your take on, at some point, can we actually solve it through partnerships, or we have to merge?
There are going to be different solutions for different situations. So let's talk about the Kesselrun and Platform One situation. So those two have landed on a partnership, and where they say, okay, Platform One, you're a technology provider. You're like a vendor that we consume, right? But Kesselrun is integrated operations and acquisition. And so when you start to think about things in terms of those shared responsibilities and the kind of contract that you leverage between the two groups, you start to land on responsibilities models that don't involve simply taking the line of Conway's Law and moving it to a different place. There are times where putting teams together and making them work the same way and to breathe the same air and work on the same tool sets is the right approach. And what I would say the dividing line is, we need to understand the value chain for each element that they provide and the linkages between those value chains. And when you start to view, if you were to think about, like if we think about the things that Platform One is really good at, right? Where the strongest parts of their value chain is, and we think about where the weaker parts of their value chain is, the actual things like the Iron Bank and the tool set and the hardened repositories are things that Platform One is amazing at. And then if we look at things like Party Bus is on the weaker side of their platform, on their other value chain. And so we say, okay, great. If you look at Kesselrun, it's inverted, right? And so the weaker part is the platform. They had to build a platform. They didn't want to have to build a platform, right? To the point where they in the early days, they bought Pivotal. And so because they thought like, okay, this is kind of the weak part of this, we're gonna kind of buy this. And so they bought that part of the value chain. And their part of the value chain is, okay, we're going to do integrated operations. We're going to do the day two pieces. We're going to do the platform elements. We're also going to have kind of the business structure around being able to pay for software factory stuff. So if you take those two things and you analyze them, you end up at exactly the split that they've ended up with, which is to say, okay, we can adopt in Kessel Run, you can say we can adopt the strong parts about Platform One and move to the Platform One system, and then we are a part of training day two operations and about completing the value stream to delivery. And so, given that split of responsibilities, we actually ended up, I think, in actually the correct place without having to chop and move people around in kind of a billet sense, and that happened. That happened organically and with some encouragement, but principally organically between the two parties to say, hey, we both have value here. Let's figure it out. And they have kind of a roadshow now where they're really talking about, where they kind of jointly talk about this solution, right? And they've both ended up in the right place. So
the roadshow is vastly underwhelming and a bunch of nothing. I can tell everybody I talk to, including in the leadership at the Air Force, is vastly unhappy with what they are briefing. The fact is, when you look at Kessel Run right now, they're not consuming the Iron Bank containers, they're not consuming Big Bang, they're not consuming any of the services. It's all a road show. It's a show. It's more a show than any tangible things, and that's because And look, I'm not saying we should have merged Kessel Run entirely, right? But they have a very well defined platform team, right? And that platform team has 100 billets. They have 60 million of funding, completely separated from the day two and the mission side of building the mission software. It would be easy to cut out, right? You mentioned Party Bus, right? That's a perfect example of where if you were to get the billets and the talents and merge it into a single team, we could have solved that, right? But when you only get half of the billets you ask and half of the money you ask, and more customers asking to use Party Bus and a growth that's unsustainable without more funding, all you end up getting is crappy service. And then people say, well, see, I can't use your service because it sucks.
Yeah, we have this problem absolutely everywhere across the enterprise, right? We're looking at problems in terms of IT backfield that you can measure in the billions. Right. I can't even give you a real number of
no one has a number.
No one has a number. Right. And so this is, so first off, everybody's underfunded, right? Nobody is flush with cash. And that's a problem writ large. Second off, the stuff that's happening at Kessel Run and Platform One is more than just roadshow. It is coming together. But it is, to your point, it is coming together organically.
It's been 2 years they've been saying the same.
But it's coming. But it's coming together organically, right? And so,
slowly, maybe way too, And the thing is, should we expect people at that level to make these kind of decisions? Why isn't that push from the top?
But this so this is exactly my point. And so I said this earlier. I'm going to say it again. The hardest commodity in the Air Force is senior leader attention time. That's it. That's the limiting factor for a lot of these things, right? And so if we have these like stack rank sets of priorities, and you think these are things that we can influence, these are things we can make go faster than organic, right? Where's the right dollar press? Where's the right level of focus? What's the right elements on the global prioritization list that we need to press, right? And I think you and I would say that because of the nature of the cultural adoption of these types of platforms and around day two operations, that is not the most important place to press for senior leader attention. I'd argue the most important place is we need to shore up our security backfield by doing a pretty thorough requirements sort of operational sort of risk reduction in and around zero trust and really find those elements like that. Sure. I think is the on fire problem.
And then stuff is an easy. It doesn't have to go very high up to have that decision done.
It doesn't. But again, senior leader attention is the limiting factor.
How much time this same senior leader spent on talking about partnering instead of just making the decision? I don't know if it's a lack of attention or time. I think it's a lack of courage from the leaders to make the decision. They effectively, I spent hours between Dr. Roper and Ms. Costello, 100, maybe 50 hours of their time on that single topic. So the time was spent. There was no decision made. In fact, Dr. Roper actually decided to do it right before he left, and that never happened. So too little, too late. But, we spent hours on this. And so the real thing we're missing maybe is just leaders that can actually make decisions.
Yeah. So so one of the key things I've noticed, and that it's very difficult, and because of the high power distance culture of the military, is that as you go further up, you lose precision, right? And so it's very difficult to drive a precise decision and be clear about the implications of that decision. Right. And so if you're going to have to defend a decision and it's at a very high level, right, senior leaders are they are very no, I wouldn't even call it risk averse. I would call it personal capital averse. Okay. And so senior leaders are very willing to take risky decisions if they understand it, or if they understand who the impacted stakeholders of those decisions are. And it becomes difficult when you say, okay, when you have to make a decision, we say like, okay, we're gonna take the Kessel Run platform team, okay, and we are going to push that into the Kessel Run platform team, and then we're going to push that into platform one. Let's just take that as a hypothetical decision, right? Without kind of commenting on whether or not that's a good idea. They need to understand what the budgetary constraints of that are, what that is going to do to the Kessel Run deliverables, what that's going to do to the platform one deliverables, what that's going to do to the organization and the billets, what that's going to do, in sort of manpower projections. The number of stakeholders around that type of move means that they have to talk to a ton of people because they're not 100% empowered to make that decision. You have to make that decision by consensus. And so because there is a lack of desire to act very, very unilaterally, and in a large organization or a large bureaucracy, that's an understandable trait. So there are going to be certain technical decisions, and there are going to be certain service level decisions that we get to make that we're driving technical precision into the decision-making process. Things about how we're going to get after zero trust, things about how we're going to get after cloud, and things about how we're going to describe how we wire up bases in the future, right? There are very explicit decisions that we need to make that are organizationally aware, and we have to make these kind of full spectrum decisions. And because precision gets lost, people never feel like they have the tools necessary to kind of make that decision. And to your point, you could say it's a gutsiness or a risk aversion thing, right? But these people typically can't visualize, because the system is sort of beyond human comprehension. They can't realize what the third and fourth order follow-on effects are of making like an incredibly bold move like that.
I don't think it's a bold move.
I know you think that.
I don't think it's. We created the problem, right? The same people who created the problem could have fixed it in. I would argue in a week. The only people that were pushing back, and only because of lack of briefing, were congressmen.
And that's interesting. Yeah.
Because they thought we were going to kill Kessel Run if they knew it was just going to make it more efficient, and there was a proper brief. And look, you're right. It's funny how we don't want to waste the senior leaders' time, which is true. At the same time, it's funny because I had like maybe 30 or 45 minutes every week with Dr. Roper. So you want to go with your biggest problems during 30 minutes. But even if you end up spending 5 minutes on the topic every freaking week, right?
Back to LinkedIn jail.
Back to LinkedIn jail. Every freaking week, right? You get 5 minutes on the topic. it compounds, right, to hours at the end of the year, right? And so you ended up wasting more time. I thought sometimes I would tell Dr. Roper, hey, we should maybe have a dedicated session on this one topic so we don't talk about this barely scratching the surface for 5 minutes every week and effectively end up fixing that problem for real in 1 hour. Is that not a better use of their time? How do you find you end up briefing people? What's the most successful way for you to brief this kind of, when you have like 20 issues in parallel you're trying to solve, and you feel like you're turning in circles briefing the same 20 issues for a year?
So getting, for me personally, so I have a small benefit of not being at this is not, my background is not some clever blue screen or whatever. I know that you're just outside on the waterfront out in DC.
Yeah,
But
I'm right here. I
yeah,
bought the place.
no, it's lovely. Great lighting. But so I'm at the mercy of not being at the Pentagon, right? And not being trapped into that cycle of having to brief, right? And getting pulled into these meetings and getting pulled. And so and it's really vital for my role to be able to kind of laser focus in on very specific issues, right? So we're going to say like, okay, we're going to dial in, and so like last week we really dialed in a lot of our ICAM implementation issues, and platform one is off and running, right? So we got a lot of questions asked. We were like, hey, what is our strategy for NPEs? What is our strategy for authorization? What are some ideas for how the service could prototype? What are things like stay away from and ignore, right? Give people some boundaries so that they can, just shut off teams and kind of run, right? And so that's been one of the kind of the lessons learned, is that this role would be so much harder in the building.
But what's interesting is I didn't spend that much time. I wasn't depending on it. I didn't spend that much time in meetings because I also was prioritizing outreach with programs and teams and prime offices and some of the HN teams and so on, right? But effectively what you're saying is you're solving all this stuff without having to go and get approval from anybody.
Nope, that's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting
A
is
little bit.
that, well, we are assembling things for a decision.
Well, yeah, but you're already fixing stuff.
We are fixing stuff. That's correct. Right. So things that don't
the
require
fact is
major
competence and technical awareness, right? And having someone in that role from the get-go, which you would expect from day one in any organization, let alone an organization the size of the Air Force and Space Force, that could have already prevented a lot of these issues from the get-go. But now that you're here, you can go and fix it.
But if I'm dialed into those particular issues, right? And
Yeah.
so you would say like, hey, there's an issue with organization between these two groups, right? Now we can raise it up, right? Or we can, which is what you did, you like bird dogged that issue because it was very much in your kind of DSO lane, right?
Yep.
And one of the things that I personally struggle with is to figure out like, okay, again, knowing that my currency is my attention and my ability to bring things up to Lauren or bring things up kind of to the glass doors. The understanding like what are the things to prioritize. Like if you look out across across the broad swath of DAF delivery items, is it kind of the way the operations team is going to transition to zero trust? Is it training for new airmen? Is it what the AI futures are? Like this is such a problem heavy environment. Do we work on kind of the meta information about what the next strategy is for the kind of a delivery of IT? And so one of the things that's really difficult and is like a constant struggle is again prioritization, right? And you had this laser focus, and which is one of the things that made you really successful in this job, was you had this laser focus on one set of practices around software development, and then the ancillary human supporting and business structures around that ecosystem, right? And because I mean, software development is hugely important, right? And hugely important in that IT delivery. You're able to put a bunch of blinders on and go. And I think that was that's kind of one of the lessons learned from that effort, and trying to figure out how we empower other people to kind of put blinders on, kind of make sure that they know their left and rights, and
Yeah, all they
and
needed
just
is
go.
someone to tell them that's okay sometimes, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that's
That's all
100%
my
it. As
point,
a
right? Most of the decisions you're making now that will have drastic impact to the Air Force and Space Force can be made pretty easily, even by the people that could have made them, but they were too scared of making them. But
yeah,
as
they
available
just
by
don't
you without
they
going back to the leadership.
they don't
You don't
they
need
don't
you need back to approval for any of this stuff.
right. A lot of people just don't feel empowered to make a decision of that sort of scale. People aren't going to say like,
I
"Hey,
found, you know what's funny? I found that when you just go and have the courage or the will or whatever you call it to just like not care and do it, no one slows you down. So when people keep saying, the bureaucracy and you have to get consensus and you have to talk to 50 people, I'm like, nope. I just went and we did it and it was just fine.
I would describe it a different way." So that is correct. The way that I think about it is that there are two types of people. There are people who are good at starting from a blank sheet of paper, and there are editors. And many, many, many people in the building are editors, which is to say, I'm going to hand you something that I think is 95% correct. Right? Tell me where you think this doesn't look right. Like, give me your notes, give me your edits, right? And that way of thinking, to say like, okay, my decision is going to be, I'm going to fill in the canvas. I'm going to tell you what the service needs to do. I'm going to tell you what it's not going to do. I'm going to tell you, oh, you have a branded mug. There you go. That's amazing.
Of course. Come on.
Yeah, see,
What are we,
swag.
cheap show or what?
Yeah, I'm not. I need to be the chief swag officer. Forget this. But my whole point is that when interacting with senior leaders, the key kind of realization is that a lot of these folks, their attention is so scattered that you can hand them something that is mostly correct, and they'll just say, "Yeah, that looks right," and then the decision's made. And so you're making these decisions. You're making these decisions because it's the most cohesive voice in the room. It answers the mail, right? And you have you and I both have that general level equivalence where we can say, okay, we're in the decision making tier, we can make these decisions, right? And it takes somebody with a lot of firepower to show up and countermand a pretty well thought out decision. And so velocity is reality, right?
Yeah.
If you're able to go and make decisions, then people just want to go.
So a lot of people ask questions, of course, about the device letter that Michael published on LinkedIn a few months ago. What was your take on the letter? And then I follow up to that. At some point, everybody is asking, what is it like to work for Lauren? Is she awesome as she pretends to be everywhere, or what is it like? So two questions in there.
Okay, a couple of things. So my reaction to Fix My Computer letter is it's really important for so there's this cultural notion, and it was in some book that I read, that it was a Christian Bros book, Kill Chain. And so there's this observation the Kill Chain. There's this observation.
If everybody did not read the Kill Chain on this show, they should go right now.
Great book.
Buy it.
Well, one of the cultural observations, and it really stuck with me, because the author is and I've gotten to chat with him a little bit. The author is a longtime Pentagon person. It says there's a conservatism in the military where they won't act until they feel that not acting is more dangerous. And so you're like, oh, okay, that's really interesting, right? That you understand that sometimes there are things and there are events that drive an unnatural urgency in things. And it's very difficult with the problems, with the threats, with the gigantic mandate, that's the huge sheer size of the organization, that rounding off effect where like urgency gets watered down. It sucks that people inherently knew the computer thing is a problem, right? The IT people of the world were like, we have my team is working with the Glassdoors right now to basically say, hey, we've known for 3 years this is a problem, right? We have Colt Woodall, the chief experience officer, who gets up every single day and tilts at this windmill, right? Where we're struggling to get tools funded, we're struggling to get these things funded, and then occasionally like this voice will ring through and then it gets that unnatural urgency, and we're just trying to grab onto that and say, yes, absolutely, right, and here's the plan. And so I'm really glad that was able to kind of cut through the fog, and it is, again, the senior leaders can only kind of shout about so many things, and you got 40 minutes with Roper, and you couldn't say, Roper, these are the 100 things that are wrong, right? I need your help on all of them. Rather, you got to have them say, like, hey, I need your help with the one worst thing, and user experience never made that one worst thing, but it's finally up there in the pantheon of things that are a problem. And so I'm glad that it did. I think it's an incredibly important topic. For me, the way that
are you fixing it though? Everybody wants to know if you're going to fix it.
Yeah. So that there's no. So there's so the fix my computer thing is actually like 10 things. And so
the main one is kind of the dual, first the device itself, which I think has been solved. It's just a matter of
It's a matter of cycling. That's exactly it. So supply chain is cycling through. So we know that
the second one was the cyber. I think the biggest one, after that was the cyber
endpoint protection
tools fighting each other, right?
Yeah. So those are the top two. There are some other things as well in and around Active Directory configuration, the way we do GPOs. There's some protected OU stuff in there.
What
GPO is a global. It's a Windows Active Directory global policy object. It's it's a configuration item for Windows Active Directory instantiations. We have thousands of them in the Air Force to meet all sorts of compliance rules. The management of them, we need a lot of work there. So, but what I'll say is that we broadly know what the problems are. We're getting after some of them. We're going after some centralized patching and other things to speed that up.
So is it a centralized team? Is there a centralized team in charge of Air Force endpoints?
There are. Okay, so there's a couple of answers to that. So MatchComs buy the hardware. We set a minimum floor, but you buy them through the centralized. I think there's a GSA vehicle where we just get immense buying power on laptops, right? Because we just buy so many of them. And so we have that's available. And then we have a team that's available for the Windows configuration. We have some operational elements.
What about the Windows? Like, is there a whole team responsible for the compounded user experience of all these things put together?
So it's Colt. So Colt with his but this is the thing, right? And so the Colt with his band of upstarts, the Triple C is very
For people that don't know, this Colt Whittle is the chief user experience officer.
Yeah, chief user experience officer of the Air Force, right? We're the only department with a user experience officer. Colt does amazing work, but he's an HQE, right? He doesn't have a large team of people. He's a highly qualified expert. So a specialty, a special part of the OPM.
Like Lauren was before. Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly it. And so and so it's you don't have supervisory authority. You don't have an army of people. You co-opted an army of people to work for you. But
actually, we can. Well, just so you know, we can have supervisory. I had it in the.
Oh, you had it. Okay, great. Yep. So, but yes, so that's
But he doesn't.
But he doesn't. Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, so there are people working on it. We are doing some of this stuff will be solved by ICAM Wave 1. We are doing the preparatory work to get to that place. Right. So the ICAM Wave 1.
5 years.
Nope. No. We should have. We are pushing out a couple of major. I'm not going to say because we are right up against an ITAS RFP.
She already did it last week, so we know the RFP is coming soon. On
no. I'm not. But I'm not going to say. I'm not going to say what the specific things are. Right. So. Yeah. So we are taking a couple of very specific actions in the next month. Which we're pretty confident we're going to start to see some pretty major updates to that. So these are items that have been in the works for 6 months, a year, right? And so when we're working through the wickets, and that's when they're
more than a year. Yeah. So okay, Colt is kind of okay. Can he doesn't have a team, but there is no real program office in charge of the complete experience of the Air Force, the endpoints, right?
No, and this is because of the 16th Air Force is a servant of two masters. the 16th Air Force, who's in charge of operations and is effectively in charge of endpoints as a part of that weapon system, has two masters, right? They have the department and they have cybercom, right? And the way that they are tasked and the way that they're manned, everything has to look like cyber to get their attention. So operational capacity to solve user experience problems and to chase those down is kind of one of the core things that we're driving towards to make sure. And that is in the works. Those conversations are in the works with Air Combat Command about how do we operationalize UX metrics. Okay, because that's the core problem, right? Is that you could solve a bunch of stuff, right? You could solve a bunch of stuff, and then entropy will come back through and degrade your performance over time. You need a team that is dedicated to solving those issues because efficiency is going to be.
That's why you can decouple cyber and user experience, right?
That's right, but cyber is or user experience is kind of a canary of cyber. But it is because you could degrade user experience. That's a part of a cyber effect. But
it seems to be very secure if the laptop is a brick.
Well, yeah. Again, some of that stuff, minimum standards for hardware, some of that stuff is, like the ITaaS image that we.
What about the endpoint stuff, right? Is that a cyber command problem? Who created that problem? Why do we have two endpoint protection solutions fighting each other on one device?
Operational requirements. So one of them is for one of them was mandated by DoD and doesn't do all the things that we needed, and the other one is the EDR solution. And so we need an EDR solution.
Do we need to?
No, we don't. But they never, because one is a DoD requirement and the other is a.
So why don't we turn off the Air Force one then? Be done.
We're working on tuning them down now. Is the short answer, right?
We're gonna end up, because Lauren was talking last week about, hey, we're trying to work with both companies to see how both products can play nice to each other, and that's not the answer, right? I mean, the answer is just pick one and be done, right?
The answer is the operational community. The operational community feels like they need an EDR solution to have specific types of querying control over laptops, right? And whether or not that is a correct or valid or a correct interpretation of that requirement, or whether or not the requirement is the best way to do it, that's the part that's up for debate, and that's the part that we have to chase to ground. Because at that point, because that those types of capabilities and the view of the way in which the operational community frames and asks for requirements is how we got to this solution, right? Is because we haven't sat down and said, okay, what do you really need to do? How are you using the tool? Vendor, is that how the tool should be used? Right? We have people have said, well, ops have said that's the requirement, right? And they've moved on their attention onto something else because again, the currency is senior leader attention.
So I remember when the DoD CIO came up with that, hey, we're going to buy Tanium for the entire department and push everyone to it and all that stuff. I was in the room when that decision was made back at the Pentagon, and I also assisted to the most mind-boggling, life-altering, want to kill yourself meeting in the Pentagon with the XCOM meeting. I don't know if you've been into many XCOM meetings with the CIO shops. But that one was specifically on the endpoint and Tanium, and you just listening to the conversation was just my brain. I think I lost brain cells that day. So everybody was pushing for Tanium, and people spent maybe a year to define what would be the criteria on how we're going to assess Tanium to see if Tanium could meet the requirements that we have for the department. So a year just to say, like, how are we going to do the assessment? No.
Yeah,
do the actual assessment, right? And then they did the assessment, and then the Air Force decided to say, hey, you know what, it kind of meet the requirement, but we're still going to do our own thing in a vacuum, and so people ended up buying, something on top of Tanium in the Air Force. How does that make sense? Do you feel like sometimes
how does that come about, or how does that make sense?
Well. How do we stop that nonsense, right? Is it ego? Is it because honestly,
it's people are making decisions. What happens is that you have a person whose scope is too massive to get good fidelity on any key decision, and they don't know enough, right? They don't know enough. They don't have enough time to drill into a specific decision, right? So they have They have, how are we going to let the next contract? We have to approve this acquisition piece. How do we validate these requirements? What are these manpower allocation issues? What are we putting in for 24 POM? What are we doing with the new tool? What are we doing with the new the squadron changeover? The amount of things that suck up leadership attention, and then we ask them to say they're like, hey boss, we did some evaluation and we don't feel empowered to change this tool, so we won't. But we think we need this tool to do our job. And he's going to say, are you sure? Right? They'll ask some probative questions, but they're no, but I mean, this is how this comes about, right? And so they say, like, how does this happen? Well, no one had the time to evaluate the impact. And the problem is that these capability cycles are too slow, right? So if we were in a posture, and this is the key takeaway for myself, which is the thing we need to drive across the entire ecosystem is velocity. Because if it takes a year to validate the requirements, you're never going to revisit that, right? You have the whole sunk cost fallacy, right? You're going to say like, oh no, we spent a year making that decision. We're not under my watch. We're not going back on that, right? And that's a reasonable, like, if the stove is hot, you don't want to touch it again. Like, okay, I get it, but the real thing is to say like, okay, we need to be able to get this capability into the field and test it for a month, test it for 2-3 weeks. Get quick feedback on it. Understand exactly what we're trying to get out of it.
I don't understand that. When I proposed it, I think people's head exploded when I said we should start spending a year defining criteria. Would it take you a year for you to define criteria on how to select an endpoint protection solution?
No, and that's so because a lot of this stuff follows a big R requirements process that drives a waterfall checklist testing evaluation mentality. And we have to get out of that for developing new cyber requirements, right? We should be able to, people love slapping tables. That's just like a cultural thing. I don't know if like you were inundated with that phrase as much as I am. People are like, we have to slap the table. I do not slap tables. In my private life, I don't slap tables. Never.
I break the table.
Yeah, no. I mean, you're a chair thrower, so I get it. But like but we have to say like, okay, there has to be a decision made. If we're gonna have an ICAM solution, right, it needs to support SAML, OpenID Connect, probably WS Federation, right? It needs to support these 6 credential types, right? We could write the requirements, the smaller requirements on a sheet of paper and says it needs to look like this, go, right? And you could do that in an hour, right? Because you know from a technical opinion standpoint, it has to look like this, right? There's you're coloring within lines that industry has made pretty dark. And so it's a clear it's a clear thing. But when you roll that up and you have different teams who are working on things and they don't feel empowered to make the apex level decision to say, actually, we're going to push back against HBSS because Tanium can just do this, or we're going to buy some HBSS add-on module instead, right? Because we feel empowered to be able to change the terms of the license agreement, and we're just going to buy it in that one product, right? Either of those types of decisions could have probably gotten us there, right? But people didn't feel empowered to do it. They did the best of what they could, and then we ended up with this Frankenstein system because there isn't a series of architects or a series of people who can like really drill down. So this job is a little bit of firefighting those things based upon the stuff that's probably most on fire. And the questions that will come in will never be totally satisfying because people will always have an interest, which is pretty bad, but probably not in the top 4, right? And the problem is we need to find ways to systematically solve some of this stuff without like a fleet of global architects, or maybe a fleet of global architects is the only way to do it for right now. But trying to drive better technical decisions in an ultra high power distance culture is the anti-pattern, right? And is why we get bad outcomes for a huge number of reasons.
All right. So I know you have a few key priorities. I wanted to try to cover them all. I don't know if we're gonna have the time, but at least let's start with ICAM. A lot of people were asking about ICAM. Tell us a little bit about your ICAM modernization effort. It's not gonna be hard to do better.
We need a global ICAM solution. We need it to be able to run on top of platform 1. We have our ICAM needs on Nipper and Sipper are not the places where it's worst, is just what I'll say there, right? And so we have other networks, we have other
and ICAM is both a person entity and non-person entity,
yes,
right? It's
and
not
non-person.
And that's a first. I don't think that's been done before, right?
No, it hasn't. And so some of the stuff that we're actually experimenting with and trying to get our heads around right now is typically in the commercial sector, your non-person entity, your credentials for non-person entity aren't PKI. And a lot of scripting and software middle layers don't support PKI containers, right? The PKCS 11 or other elements. And so you have to have an NPE strategy, which kind of goes against the principles of DoD PKI. And then you have to think, okay, like is that okay?
Well, the DoD PKI team has no real strategy for NPE. They can't even issue. In fact, when I reached out to DISA, they couldn't even issue certificate for Kubernetes cluster. I wanted short-lived rotating certs. They have no automation to do any of that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So like there's no like Acme server or something like that internally where you could do like kind of like the Let's Encrypt system, or even there are a couple of proprietary certificate issuance items. Certainly there are ones attached to cloud elements, or you could have like an HSM or something like that you could issue CSR requests against. Like there are systems, both proprietary and open sources, that do this. We don't have any support for that today in the DAF, right? And so having that short-lived like kind of Kubernetes like a machine identity type certificate doesn't exist. You only get kind of the long-lived version that you get when you go to like the Air Force portal or something.
Yeah, and we deployed the first on platform 1 2 years ago, the first PKI stack. We're using Vault at the time on platform 1, and we had to go to explain it to some of the PKI teams. And this,
for those listening, HashiCorp Vault, not Air Force Vault. Go on.
Yeah, HashiCorp Vault, the product.
Yeah,
sorry, too many vaults. And they really they didn't even see the need at the time of having an NP capability down to the microservice layer of rotating certs and having short-lived certificates. So it's pretty exciting to see that now at least you're able to even push that kind of broader ICAM mindset. So what's going to be the next steps? What's the plan for 23, I guess, and 22 too, not just 23?
So right now the Platform 1 team are experimenting with some of the elements of the DISA ICAM stack. We have a couple of
Which, by the way, they did a vague. I was impressed. We criticized this a lot, particularly when you used to help them with other stuff. But now that you're not there, they finally do good work, right?
Yeah, I was drilling holes in their boat the whole time. Yeah, my reign of sabotage.
Disastrous, right? I mean, but now, I was shocked. No kidding around. But this time, honestly, for real, the ICAM team at this, they have a tough time sharing and partnering with others. But I can tell you, I was very impressed with the tech stack they picked and how quickly they were going to build it.
Yeah. So to give credit to the DISA ICAM team, those folks have a very difficult mandate because they're choosing the comptroller elements first. And so there's a big mandate in the DoD to really push for good auditability on financial management systems as from Congress. And those ERPs are a beast, right? So it's not just commodity applications that use like a good, like a SAML middleware or something. These are like really deep, make sure the type of identity problem is make sure the submitter of a contract can't approve it, type of financial auditability requirements. And that's so deep in the belly of the ERP.
We should do that, by the way, every day with LBAC. And I don't know if you've seen, by the way, I wanted to mention it to people that have not seen it. NIST has been working on next generation access control, and they're publishing a couple of special publications, which actually is taking the LBAC label-based control and LBAC role-based control and augmenting it with NP and augmenting it with more labels. And it's pretty game changing. It's pretty much what you guys are doing now in real life, but I was also impressed with that work at NIST as well.
Yeah, NIST is my perennial plane reading. When you're like disconnected, you don't want to pay $4 for airplane, and you're like, all right, 100-page NIST document.
So you're the one reading all this stuff.
Hey, occasionally you have to, right? You have to like understand like what they're getting at. but yeah, so we're the Platform One team is kind of experimenting with it. We have a couple of near-term customers who need it right away. The identity federation components of it solve some of our identity movement issues. There are some other things as well that we're looking at, like license management as an attribute, other things that we know that some of those products do. So
what about the NATO? Are you working with MPCO and bringing in all
yeah,
the mission partners?
Yeah, so mission partners, I mean, especially with especially with the kind of state of the world, our coalition partners are incredibly important to work with. We do have a kind of a constant dialogue going with MPCO, which is the Mission Partner Capability Office. It's in SAF AA, SAF CDM. Technically, it was the executive agent for all of the DoD for the kind of next generation partnership networks. And they have really unique identity challenges because you can't install things on foreign national computers. And if you're working with, I'll pick a friendly country. If you're working with Canadians, you can't validate Canadian identities, right? You have to trust the assertion that the Canadians have in fact vetted.
They kept saying it was challenging, but honestly, it's not that challenging if all you got to do is blindly trust it. Is it really?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
all you got to do is nothing. I mean,
this is our some trust architecture. It's fine.
I mean, come on, this is like trust blindly whatever the IDP of the foreign partner is telling you, and move on with your life. Is that really a challenge? They kept saying this to me. I'm like, pretty much you're telling me you got nothing you have to do. So why is that hard? I don't know.
Yeah, it's so trying to understand like how you map and how you coordinate on central attributes and how you do the
labeling and
labeling and stuff like that. It's not a technical problem as much as it is a multinational coordination and data sharing agreement problem. But it is but no, a lot of conversations with those guys. There's also a lot of DSOG and J3 stuff in the mix because it is a large
and
program
J6,
like that.
right?
Yeah, J6. That's exactly it. So because it's joint, it's all.
That used to be my life. So
yeah, there you go.
I still have nightmares. So, although I miss it too, so I guess you can have nightmares and miss something.
Oh, this job is no. There are you can look anywhere around you and find something that desperately needs your attention.
Yeah.
Right. And
you lose a little bit more sleep every time.
Yeah, I mean, you and I mean, I've lost more hair than you, so you're doing great, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you started already with almost nothing left, so
yeah, I know. It
so you
really is. Yeah.
I gained 20 pounds, So.
There you go.
So what about this ICAM work? Are you funded? Is it happening? Is it a dream?
Nope, we're funded. So yep, we're funded. We're funded. I think we're funded appropriately. We'll be able to execute. I mean, there's this there's this and this is like an interesting thought experiment, right? Which is like, if you had twice the money, could you execute on it? Right? Would you get twice the value? Like, what's the value towards like just throwing money at a problem type trade-off, right? And
yeah, I would argue you don't need that much money to solve the Air Force IT problem.
So ICAM and zero trust architectures and even cloud are super challenging problems because of the size of the backfield.
Right.
And so it is not to stand the stack up, to even get the services team in place, to do the licensing. That's not the expensive portion of it, right? That's probably 10% or less of the overall
We should
cost.
even do that we should have an enterprise team managing licenses and stuff. The fact that we are doing it per program is insane.
Yes.
It's way too much work.
So we're doing...
Every team is building this to pull, and everything is in the vacuum for every single program.
Yes, there are places where we are starting to centralize large license buys.
Right. For example, I pushed before I left, and I put into my letter to SecAF that we should have an enterprise agile acquisition team building contract vehicles to be able to buy licenses in bulk and get discounts at the end of the year based on the volume of license we ended up buying. Yeah, pretty basic stuff.
Right. That sounds like a good idea, right? I mean, I don't have any rocks. I don't have any
Everybody's
rocks to
like,
throw
yep,
against that.
and then nothing happens, so anyway.
Right. I mean, because it doesn't get attention, right? That's the core thing. Executive attention is the most.
I couldn't make more noise than what I did. Okay, so I did pretty good getting people's attention. But anyway, so next question is on your. We talked about ICAM. On your data fabric side. Tell us a little bit about what's your plan. I remember when we were assessing it, we had 26 data lake warehouse things in the Air Force. There's kind of 6 that we want to really keep and focus on.
Yeah, we've identified 6. Yeah, we've identified 6. So this is one of the things that we're starting in a couple of weeks, which is, what are the data access paradigms for how do you create like a central data access paradigm? The challenge here is that there's a lot more partners in place, and so we have to make a midterm decision about whether or not we invest in our own kind of, think about it like an API religion or an API proxying system or a data access paradigm system, or whether or not is there an enterprise service for us that does credential brokering and behavioral analytics and your validation of API tokens, or do you federate that? And then what is the credential management system to the MPE problem? So understanding the data access pieces and how that relates to whether or not the platform is kind of proprietary and bespoke, or whether or not it's assembled from components. That's what we're kind of laying out on the table to get a solid way ahead on.
But what about the 26, right? We got 26. There's still 20 that has to go away.
Yep. So it's going to be a matter of, well, again,
it's never going to happen, is it?
No, it will happen. The trick to figuring this stuff out is to look through basically the receipt store of the Air Force and hit sort. Right. And whichever the data lakes are that are the non-enterprise ones that are using the most amount of money, we're going to have to figure out how do we develop the business model to get them into the enterprise data lake, or whether or not that's even worth it, right? Whether or not you just age that data out and move over to the new one. Moving data lakes is a particularly ugly problem, just because of the sheer gravity of them. But the getting into the how you liberate data from the boutique systems is a core problem. We need a services team that does basically only that.
Right. Okay, so are you also funded to start merging and fixing some of that? Because we don't even have a proper LBAC capability at any kind of scale. I was bringing Kafka and Elastic at the time to bring PubSub and basic lake capabilities with policy enforcement points to enforce labels and things like that.
We have a few data tagging pieces in some of the data lakes. Like I know there's one in Vault. There is a limited one in Elixir. And so,
but it needs to be accessible to the enterprise and
yes. So building up from the building blocks section.
I mean, UDL as Kafka, right? But it's the way they implemented it by putting it behind a proxy and not making Kafka accessible is a massive mistake.
I haven't looked at it, so I will take your word for it.
It's effectively they have a proxy in front of it, so you can't use any of the connectors. You have to talk to their custom code proxy to authenticate and do the labeling, and so it's kind of a middleware between Kafka and the consumers, and it makes no sense.
I believe you. So we're looking at that again. We're looking at that problem. We have this with a sort of benefit of COVID being ways that we're kind of starting these major shut off email deep dive sessions that are really pretty valuable. That are pretty valuable for the enterprise. Let's see here, and so we're doing some of that in a couple of weeks. Is sort of the answer. But I know that we have to get MPEs correct. I know we have to get the governance pieces correct. We have to get the business ownership for MPEs correct. We have to figure out what the API story or the access token story is. Whether or not we're going to do things per platform or whether or not we're going to have generalized ones.
Yeah, you want to be able to delegate down to the lowest level, right? All these labeling and data ownership kind of control. the funny thing is when we had 26, the first answer that people come up is, let's create a 27 so we can solve it all.
Yeah, that's right. Now they're 27 standards. Yeah. There's a great XKCD coming about that. Be like, oh, these 18 standards don't solve anything.
Yep. I remember that, there's a famous meme for that, but I guess it happens in real life. I thought it was just a joke.
Nope.
But I saw it happen.
Conway's right.
So we talk about data now, about transport, right? You really that's really a big chunk of your expertise, and a lot of people said to me, and I want to tell here people that I completely not agree with that statement. Some people were concerned about your potential conflict of interest with Akamai, and I can tell after talking to you and spending a lot of time with you in the job that's not a thing. I've never seen you push Akamai or try to do anything that's not ethical. So people that think that sometimes are just short-sighted, and you would not have taken such a pay cut and come do this here if it was just a little bit of agenda to come push some Akamai licenses. So I want to make that clear for everybody. And two, your expertise obviously is also deep in transport and everything you've done. What are you solving on the transport side, and how is it going to be different from what we had today?
So there's a lot of things, right? So really one of the key pushes that we have is around SD-WAN, which is our ability to compose different modalities of transport into sort of application aware policy that we're able to move around when we need to, right? Whether or not that's DoDen transport, whether or not that's commercial transport, whether or not that's type 1 encrypted, whether or not that's commercial solutions classified. We have a lot of different options for how we are able to connect our users with our data. And so by kind of generating our own plan for SD-WAN, and that's, if zero trust and zero trust architecture is number one, SD-WAN is number two, right? So survivability of comms is key. Because we have cyber capable adversaries in Europe and Asia, and so those adversaries are going to seek to kind of deny our movement and our ability to resist that and to bring kind of massive maneuver to communications. I think is going to be key. So SD-WAN is really our solution to that, and it's something that we're getting after right now when we're delivering capabilities this year on. And so Chief Architect's Office under Preston has a stick under that. But that's, and then there are other elements to transport than just the policy, right? We need to be able to have, right, what's the circuit buying strategy? There's some business stuff here about how we get those circuits, about, how we do the capacity planning, how we do the policy creation. There are other like non-material solutions that are a part of this that we're thinking through. But we need to make sure, how do we have the right partnerships? Is it Starlink as an example of a commercial Starlink Viasat, right? We'll mention kind of competitors. Milsat as 5G, local 4G, local Wi-Fi. How do we take each of those transport mechanisms and make them something that we can secure in any environment, we can operate in any environment, and then how do we bring that same survivability and say this is the same survivability that exists in theater, same survivability that exists terrestrially. All of that stuff is important and is a kind of key to the architectures that we are developing right now and the types of SD-WAN solutions we're looking at.
All right. So we're going to have, I have one final question at the end, but was there anything else you wanted to bring up before we have to let you go?
No, I thank you for the time, and it's been fun catching up with you. We'll have to do this again at some point. We can,
yeah. We want to see your progress in 1 year. Okay. That's for sure.
Sure. I'd love to be held to that. Right. We'd love to be able to say like, hey, this is what we got done. Okay. So it's what, March 8th, we'll come back March 8th next year. And we'll say like, this is a big year, right? Well, this is what we got done. But, the real challenges here are going to be, how do we find, discover, and communicate better about the innovation that we're doing at the Air Force? There are lots of people who are doing great things at the edges who are, constraints drive innovation, right? And the Air Force is full of constraints, right? And so people find creative ways to get their job done. They find creative ways to solve problems. They find creative ways to kind of pour their heart and soul into the mission. And we want to be able to kind of find and elevate those needs and those successes. And so ways in which that we can find to bring the Air Force together from a kind of an information and knowledge management, knowledge sharing I think is going to be key to the future of how we succeed as a force. Because those innovations are going to happen at the edge, and then the center is going to have to figure out how to support them. We're not going to be making, big programs whole cloth from the middle. So I think it's key to, for us, we think about outreach models, but also like that in reach. Like how do we find the interesting things that are happening and give them the attention that they need?
Spot on. All right. My next question is always a fun one. So I asked it before, but I'm going to ask it again because you tried to avoid it. I'm not going to let you do that. So tell us a little bit about how is it to be working for Lauren.
Oh, no, I didn't try to avoid it. You asked me a 2-part question and I answered the first one.
I know, you forgot the second. I kind of let it happen because I wanted you to do it at the end.
Is she watching? Can we tell?
She's okay. Always watching. She
always
watching.
All right.
She has a camera in your bedroom.
No, Lauren's great. And so Lauren, I say this before, Lauren's got an amazingly good ground game. She's passionate about the technology. She's passionate about doing the right thing. And so she has really great messaging, and she's an amazing executive like that. It's really satisfying for me to be able to kind of give her the goods, right? Which is to say, hey, no, our recommendation comes with a level of technical specificity that we have run to ground, right? Mm-hmm. And to be able to give the office of the CIO. So Lauren's great to work for, both personally and professionally. The office of the CIO it has this very unique function where it is not in the military chain of command, but it is accountable to IT outcomes. Mm-hmm. And if we look at how we view ourselves in response to IT outcomes, and we are that overseer function, we're able to spot the places where the traditional military hierarchy is failing. And I think we have a really good eye, and I think she is dispositionally well aligned to that outcome thinking, both being a person who's kind of outside the military, a person who has, vast commercial experience, and a person who is, a technology lover at heart. And so I think it's one of her strengths. I think the office plays really
perfect. You make it look like perfect, like she looks she is. That's
she's annoying. A foodie. That's her secret. So okay, that's it. We're talking dirt about Lauren now. So Lauren has, I swear to God, a restaurant recommendation for any city in America.
Oh yeah.
It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. I remember texting her like one time I was at Disney. I was like, hey, where should I eat at Disney? Like huge text about the best places to eat at Disney, like off the dome. So anyway, encyclopedic foodie knowledge. Too bad there's not a chief foodie officer. She'd crush that harder, but CIO, she does well.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Wanted to thank Jay again for joining us today. As always, it was nice to catch up with you. Next week, we're going to get the CEO of Otimo. Raja will be joining us to talk about how to bring DevSecOps culture and process into an organization and how to scale it. And he's done it with multiple groups, including at Platform One and other teams. So it's going to be fun to see. And how he's investing in people. How is he training people? How is he, what kind of certification is he looking after? How is he enabling that to happen at scale in large organization, in the government, but also on the commercial side? So it's going to be an interesting conversation. Before we're going to get John Olson, the Air Force and Space Force Chief Data and AI Officer, join us after that as well. So it's going to be fun month. So stay tuned next Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, as always. Thanks so much for joining. Thanks, Jay. Good to see you as always.
Great to see you, Nick. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.